Anthony Ashley Cooper, 3rd Earl of Shaftesbury, was an English politician, philosopher and writer. Biography. He was born at Exeter House in London, the grandson of Anthony Ashley Cooper, 1st Earl of Shaftesbury and son of Anthony Ashley Cooper, 2nd Earl of Shaftesbury. His mother was Lady Dorothy Manners, daughter of John Manners, 8th Earl of Rutland. According to a story told by the 3rd Earl, the marriage was negotiated by John Locke, who was a trusted friend of the 1st Earl. The 2nd Lord Shaftesbury has been traditionally, and possibly unfairly, regarded to have been both physically and mentally inadequate. Although the letters sent by a youthful 3rd Earl to both his parents reveal a rather more complex picture, not least the emotional manipulation attempted by his mother in refusing to see her son unless he cut off all ties to his father. At the age of 3, the future 3rd Earl was made over to the formal guardianship of his grandfather, Locke, who in his capacity of medical attendant to the Ashley household, had already assisted at the child's birth, was now entrusted with the supervision of his education. This was conducted according to the principles enunciated in Locke's Thoughts Concerning Education, and the method of teaching Latin and Greek conversationally was pursued with such success by his instructress, Elizabeth Birch, that at the age of 11, it is said, Ashley could read both languages with ease. In November 1683, some months after the death of the 1st Earl, his father sent him to Winchester College as a warden's boarder. Being shy and mocked because of his grandfather, he appears to have been miserable at school. He left Winchester in 1686 for a course of foreign travel. This brought him into contact with artistic and classical associations which would strongly influence his character and opinions. On his travels he apparently did not seek the conversation of other young English gentlemen on their travels, but rather that of their tutors, with whom he could converse on congenial topics. In 1689, the year after the Glorious Revolution, Lord Ashley returned to England, and for nearly 5 years he appears to have led a quiet and studious life. There can be no doubt that the greater part of his attention was directed to the perusal of classical authors and to the attempt to realize the true spirit of classical antiquity. He had no intention, however, of becoming a recluse. He became parliamentary candidate for the borough of Poole and was returned on the 21st of May 1695. He soon distinguished himself by a speech in support of the bill for regulating trials in cases of treason, one provision of which was that a person indicted for treason or misprision of treason should be allowed the assistance of counsel. Although a Whig, Ashley could not be depended on to give a party vote. He was always ready to support propositions from other quarters, if they appeared to him to promote the liberty of the subject and the independence of Parliament. His poor health forced him to retire from Parliament at the dissolution of July 1698. He suffered from asthma, a complaint which was aggravated by the London smoke. The following year, to escape the London environment, he purchased a property in Little Chelsea, adding a 50-foot extension to the existing building to house his bedchamber and library, and planting fruit trees, and every kind of vine. He sold the property to Narcissus Luttrell in 1710. Lord Ashley now retired to the Netherlands, where he became acquainted with John Leclerc, Pierre Bayle, Benjamin Furley, the English Quaker merchant, at whose house Locke had resided during his stay at Rotterdam, and probably Limborch and the rest of the literary circle of which Locke had been a cherished and honoured member 9 or 10 years before. To Lord Ashley this society was probably far more congenial than his surroundings in England. Unrestrained conversation on the topics which most interested him, philosophy, politics, morals, religion, was at this time to be had in the Netherlands with less danger and in greater abundance than in any other country in the world. To the period of this sojourn in the Netherlands must probably be referred the surreptitious impression or publication of an imperfect edition of the Enquiry Concerning Virtue, from a rough draft sketched when he was only 20 years of age. This liberty was taken, during his absence, by Toland. After an absence of over 12 months, Ashley returned to England, and soon succeeded his father as Earl of Shaftesbury. He took an active part, on the Whig side, in the general election of 1700 to 1701, and again, with more success, in the autumn election of 1701. At this time, he built a folly structure on the Shaftesbury estate, known as the Philosopher's Tower. This folly sits in a field, clearly visible from the B3078 just south of Cranbourne. It is thought that he did a lot of his philosophizing in this tower, and from this suggestion it has become known as the Philosopher's Tower. It is said that William III showed his appreciation of Shaftesbury's services on this latter occasion by offering him a secretaryship of state, which, however, his worsening health compelled him to decline. Had the king's life continued, Shaftesbury's influence at court would probably have been considerable. After the first few weeks of Anne's reign, Shaftesbury, who had been deprived of the vice-admiralty of Dorset, returned to his retired life, but his letters to Furley show that he retained a keen interest in politics. In August 1703, he again settled in the Netherlands, in the air of which he seems, like Locke, to have had great faith. At Rotterdam he lived, he says in a letter to his steward Wheelock, at the rate of less than £200 a year, and yet had much to dispose of and spend beyond convenient living. He returned to England, much improved in health, in August 1704. Although he had received immediate benefit from his stay abroad, he was showing symptoms of consumption, and gradually became a confirmed invalid. His occupations were now almost exclusively literary, and from this time forward he was engaged in writing, completing or revising the treatises which were afterwards included in the Characteristics. He continued, however, to take a warm interest in politics, both home and foreign, and especially in the war against France, of which he was an enthusiastic supporter. Shaftesbury was nearly 40 before he married, and even then he appears to have taken this step at the urgent instigation of his friends, mainly to supply a successor to the title. The object of his choice was Jane Ewer, the daughter of a Hertfordshire gentleman. The marriage took place in the autumn of 1709, and on the 9th of February 1711, was born at his house at Reigate, in Surrey, his only child and heir, the fourth Earl, to whose manuscript accounts we are in great part indebted for the details of his father's life. The match appears to have been happy, though Shaftesbury had little sentiment on the subject of married life, with the exception of a preface to the Sermons of Dr. Whichcote, one of the Cambridge Platonists or Latitudinarians, published in 1698. Shaftesbury appears to have printed nothing himself till 1708. About this time the French Camassids attracted much attention by their extravagances and follies. Various repressive remedies were proposed, but Shaftesbury maintained that fanaticism was best defeated by raillery and good humour. In support of this view he wrote a letter concerning enthusiasm to Lord Somers, dated September 1707, which was published anonymously in the following year, and provoked several replies. In May 1709, he returned to the subject, and printed another letter, entitled Sensus Communis, an essay on the freedom of wit and humour. In the same year he also published The Moralists, a philosophical rhapsody, and in the following year Soliloquy, or Advice to an Author. None of these pieces seems to have been printed either with his name or his initials. In 1711, the Characteristics of Men, Manners, Opinions, Times appeared in 3 volumes, also without any name or initials on the title page, and without even the name of a printer. These volumes contain, in addition to the 4 treatises already mentioned, Miscellaneous Reflections, now first printed, and the Inquiry Concerning Virtue and Merit, described as formerly printed from an imperfect copy, now corrected and published entire, and as printed first in 1699. The declining state of Shaftesbury's health rendered it necessary for him to seek a warmer climate, and in July 1711 he set out for Italy. He settled at Naples in November, and lived there for more than a year. His principal occupation at this time must have consisted in preparing for the press a second edition of the Characteristics, which appeared in 1713. Soon after his death, the copy, carefully corrected in his own handwriting, is preserved in the British Library. He was also engaged, during his stay at Naples, in writing the little treatise entitled De Notion of the Historical Draft or Tablature of the Judgment of Hercules, and the Letter Concerning Design. A little before his death he had also formed a scheme of writing a discourse on the arts of painting, sculpture, etching, and sea, but when he died he had made but little progress with it. Medals, and pictures, and antiquities, he writes to Furley, are our chief entertainments here. His conversation was with men of art and science, the virtuosi of this place. The events preceding the Treaty of Utrecht, which he saw as paving the way for a base desertion of British allies, greatly troubled the last months of Shaftesbury's life. He did not, however, live to see the actual conclusion of the treaty, as he died the month before, the 4th of February 1713. His body was brought back by sea to England and buried at Wimborne St Giles, the family seat in Dorsetshire. His only son, Anthony Ashley Cooper, 4th Earl of Shaftesbury, succeeded him in his titles and republished Characteristics in 1732. His great-grandson was the famous philanthropist, Anthony Ashley Cooper, 7th Earl of Shaftesbury. Assessment. Shaftesbury's amiability of character seems to have been one of his principal characteristics. Like Locke, he had a peculiar pleasure in bringing forward young men. Among these may be especially mentioned Michael Ainsworth, a native of Wimborne St Giles, the young man who was the recipient of the letters addressed to a student at the university, and was maintained by Shaftesbury at University College, Oxford. The interest which Shaftesbury took in his studies, and the desire that he should be specially fitted for the profession which he had selected, that of a clergyman of the Church of England, are marked features of the letters. Other protégés were Crell, a young Poole, the two young Furleys, and Harry Wilkinson, a boy who was sent into Furley's office at Rotterdam, and to whom several of the letters still extant in the Record Office are addressed. In the popular mind, Shaftesbury is generally regarded as a writer hostile to religion. But, however short his orthodoxy might fall if tried by the standards of any particular church, his temperament was preeminently religious. This fact is shown in his letters. The belief in a God, all-wise, all-just and all-merciful, governing the world providentially for the best, pervades all his works, his correspondence and his life. Nor had he any wish to undermine established beliefs, except where he conceived that they conflicted with a truer religion and a purer morality. To the public ordinances of the Church he scrupulously conformed. But, unfortunately, there were many things both in the teaching and the practice of the ecclesiastics of that day, which were calculated to repel men of sober judgment and high principle. These evil tendencies in the popular presentation of Christianity undoubtedly begot in Shaftesbury's mind a certain amount of repugnance and contempt to some of the doctrines of Christianity itself, and, cultivating, almost of set purpose, his sense of the ridiculous, he was too apt to assume towards such doctrines and their teachers a tone of raillery. But, whatever might be Shaftesbury's speculative opinions or his mode of expressing them, all witnesses bear testimony to the elevation and purity of his life and aims. As an earnest student, and ardent lover of liberty, an enthusiast in the cause of virtue, and a man of unblemished life and untiring beneficence, Shaftesbury probably had no superior in his generation. His character and pursuits are the more remarkable, considering the rank of life in which he was born and the circumstances under which he was brought up. In many respects he reminds us of the Stoic philosopher and Roman Emperor Marcus Aurelius, whose works he studied with avidity, and whose influence is stamped upon his own productions. Other works. Most of Shaftesbury's writings have been already mentioned. In addition to these, there have been published 14 letters from Shaftesbury to Molesworth, edited by John Toland in 1721, some letters to Benjamin Furley, his sons, and his clerk Harry Wilkinson, included in a volume entitled Original Letters of Locke, Sidney and Shaftesbury, which was published by T. Forster in 1830, and again in an enlarged form in 1847. 3 letters, written respectively to Stringer, Lord Oxford and Lord Godolphin, which appeared, for the first time, in the General Dictionary. And lastly a letter to Leclerc, in his Recollections of Locke, first published in Notes and Queries on 8 February 1851. The letters to a young man at the university, already mentioned, were first published in 1716. The letter on design was first published in the edition of the Characteristics issued in 1732. Besides the published writings, there are several memoranda, letters, rough drafts, etc., in the Shaftesbury papers in the Record Office. Writing style. Shaftesbury took great pains in the elaboration of his style, and he succeeded so far as to make his meaning transparent. The thought is always clear, but, on the other hand, he did not equally succeed in attaining elegance, an object at which he seems equally to have aimed. There is a curious affectation about his style, a falsetto note, which, notwithstanding all his efforts to please, is often irritating to the reader. Its main characteristic is perhaps best hit off by Charles Lamb when he calls it genteel. He poses too much as a fine gentleman, and is so anxious not to be taken for a pedant of the vulgar scholastic kind that he falls into the hardly more attractive pedantry of the aesthete and virtuoso. But he is easily read and understood. Fowler, writing in the early 20th century, in the 11th edition of the Encyclopaedia Britannica, states that, probably, the wide popularity which his works enjoyed in the 18th century, and hence the agreeable feeling with which, notwithstanding all their false taste and the tiresome digressions, they impress the modern reader,